Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat Five segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. What is up? Welcome back to Big Fat Five, a podcast financially supported by Big Fat Snare Drum. My name is Ben Hilsinger, and this week's guest is Jojo Mayer. I'm in the midst of a project right now that has me going through a bunch of past episodes, and I will be announcing that project shortly, and I'm super excited about it. But when I went back through the Jojo episode, I was reminded of its importance. Jojo is a mind-blowing player who helped pioneer the drum and bass movement in New York City by reverse engineering programmed drum loops and applying them to the drum set. He's also revered for his exceptional technique, which he dissects in the wildly popular instructional series titled Secret Weapons of the Modern Drummer, Parts 1 and 2. He's also a leader of his own band, Nerve, which he founded back in 1997. And we don't necessarily stick to the normal format of this one because it was recorded back in 2021, right at the transition of this new format. But Jojo's a great storyteller, and we start off with a few anecdotes about a cymbal once owned by Billy Higgins that Jojo picked up by happenstance, and Jojo's time spent studying, quote-unquote, with Freddie Gruber. But we certainly touch on a lot of Jojo's opinions, perspectives, and all that jazz regarding accepting influences, but knowing when they're actually a detriment to your own personal growth on the instrument. He's a very philosophical man, and he shares quite a few nuggets of slap-you-in-the-face style wisdom. And even though this is probably one of our most downloaded episodes across the life of the show, we've been getting a lot of new listeners, so I wanted to push this towards the top because, as I already said, it's rather important. I've also cleaned it up a bit and put a little cute bow on it, so there you have it. Also, stay tuned for my little project announcement, but in the meantime, please enjoy my chat with Jojo Mayer. Cheers. In your documentary, Changing Time, you visit your family's home and you take a little tour of the basement and you reference this, and then you sit behind a kit from your childhood and you touch this ride cymbal that you say, oh, this was Billy Higgins. And it's been on a bunch of jazz recordings, including Watermelon Man. And then you say it's a long story. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, totally. Okay, now, there's a part mythology on it, but, I had to put the pieces together. So basically, it's like in 1981, I was like 18 or something like that. And I had a gig in Paris with Tony Scott. Like Tony Scott was like a clarinet and saxophone player. Back in the days, he was the musical director of Billie Holiday, so he was, he was playing with Charlie Parker and all those guys. So like a really big guy and in a way, kind of like a genius too, because he was kind of like one of the first guys that invented world music. Like he was one of the first jazz guys that started to do things with African music and Far Eastern, Middle Eastern music. Like there's one record, kind of famous record in some circles, it's called Music for Zen and Other Pleasures. And that was like in the 60s, so the guy was really spearheading a movement that didn't really arrive 20 years later. So He was a bad cat, an incredible player. And I had that gig with him in Paris in 81 at the what used to be the Club Saint-Germain, where all the old Art Blakey recordings were made. Like it was not called the Club Saint-Germain, but anyway. So I arrived at this gig, as a greenhorn, but I got the gig, so like he knew that I could play. And Tony was a wild man. It's kind of like, you remember that movie, kind of cheesy movie,
Whiplash.
Whiplash. Okay.
Yeah.
You remember the teacher?
Oh, yeah.
Like super old school, kind of like, tormenting people, coming up with new devices to just torture people. He was
Sure.
like that. I mean, he had a sweet side, I have to say, but he had a dark side, and that dark side, when the music was not exactly what he wanted, he got on your case, So anyway, so I was in Swiss, still in Switzerland. That was before I moved to America. And of course, all Swiss drummers play Pisces cymbals,
Yeah.
So I had the wrong cymbals for that gig, kind of, I know it was like some trebly sounding cymbals, and it was like, what is this shit,
Yeah.
If you show up with those cymbals tomorrow, don't bother to show up, This is, like, get some cymbals. Now, I was broke, and like, well, I couldn't just, I was like, okay, how am I going to know the cymbal? I didn't know anyone in Paris. So what I did, I took that ride cymbal, I don't remember what it was, some 202, like, heavy ride. So, bing, something is really
not
good
a jazz
for, like,
cymbal.
Totally not,
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to put some tape on it. So anyway, so I went up to the area where all the music stores are, kind of around Clichy, where kind of like the red light district, where the Moulin Rouge is, and there was a drum store that actually still exists. It's called La Baguetterie. So I went in there and I went to I said, look, I have this cymbal. It's kind of brand new, and can you trade that in? Can I trade this in? Do you have some cymbals that might be, looking for a jazz cymbal? So he went down to the basement and he came up with this pile of like broken and dusty cymbals that probably have been sitting there for years. Mm-hmm. And I went through that pile, and then I found this was also a Pisces cymbal. Was like an old, like Formula 602 medium ride, basically, but it didn't have any stamps on it. So and it had rivets. I was like, okay, this is good, So would you trade that in? So okay, you can have this. So it was a moneyless transaction because he knew he was going to be able to sell that other cymbal. So he said, okay, by the way, this cymbal is from a really famous American jazz drummer who a couple of years ago was hanging around Paris, and he sold the entire kit, and this is what's left, I said, well, do you know the name of that guy? I said, no, you will have to ask the manager. This has been here for many years. So I was roaming around the stores for, 20 minutes, and then I was going to go. And then at that point, the manager came in, and the guy said, hey, what's the name of that guy that this cymbal belongs to? I say, well, that was Billy Higgins' cymbal. So it was like, okay, so I knew who that was. Went to the gig, did the gig, everybody was happy, I had the right sound. Then, after I got back from that gig, I went to Notteville, to the Pisces factory, and I say, can you tell me what this cymbal is? And they looked at it and said, okay, this doesn't have serial number, so this is pre-1960, right? This was before the internet, where you could Google, Billy Higgins stuff as well. I asked people that knew him to say, well, yeah, he always played those medium ride formula cymbals with rivets, which, Pisces is a highly consistent manufacturer. So they are very, very consistent. It's not like, the hand-hammered stuff. This is like, it's a crap shot. You get one good one out of 10, So Pisces early on had very good. So I went back and listened to cymbals. Okay, this is a sizzle cymbal, and okay, this could be this cymbal. So some guys confirmed this is probably that cymbal. I remember that cymbal. So years later, when you could Google, I found images. What probably is this cymbal? From early 60s, mid 60s. So I guess he let go of that cymbal at some point for whatever reason. and it ended up there. So there's a bit of a mythology. I don't have forensic evidence that it is that symbol, but
Yeah.
circumstantial evidence points to it. I never got to meet him to actually ask him, because he passed away early on when I was in New York. So unfortunately, I couldn't say, hey, is this your symbol? But circumstantial evidence points to the fact that it could be. Those guys had many symbols, of course, but Billy was one of the most recorded guys, and he didn't just record jazz, but a lot of R&B, and soul music and musical stuff. So he was on a lot of records. And back in the days, those guys didn't carry that many symbols with them, so they kind of had, this is my setup, and until something cracks or gets lost or you sell it because you need money, I don't know, you would remain playing the same setups. I'm not a collector, I'm a drummer. A 57 Telecaster is a great thing to have, but all the players that I know that know how to hang, they would just grab any guitar and they deliver, So the sound is in the hands. It's great to have a great instrument that responds sensitively and has a big range. But the bottom line is I've seen a lot of great guys playing on crap, and it sounded amazing. So early on, I embraced that ideology.
Sure. Well, speaking of early on and you taking a few lessons, I know you are mostly self-taught, but I did hear in an interview talking about Freddie Gruber, and you said one of the 2 lessons was just some stoner shit. That's a quote from you. Can you quickly talk about what you mean by that for people that don't really know the energy that Freddie was?
Okay, well, let me give you a quick pre-roll. I am self-taught. I never had drum lessons, So when I was in my mid-30s, I was in New York, I started to get exposure to the big drum community. I meet all these guys, I get to hang out with, Vinny and my heroes, and around New York. And at some point, I kind of passed the threshold where I was invited to hang with them, and this is an amazing moment when it's happening. So I always had chops, but I was a natural player. So at one point, I started to get really interesting in the mechanics, and people tell me, oh, this guy. So I asked Vinny, who should I ask, how do you do this? How do you do that? And we're like, man, talk to this guy. And he pointed me to Jim Chapin,
Oh, sure.
And then I did a little bit of Jim Chapin. All of these things were informal lessons. They happened in a hotel room at 4 a.m. with an open mini bar, and it was like, to do this. It was not like, see you next week. It was all kind of like at the table or on a parking lot at 5 a.m. with a pad. That's how those guys showed me stuff. And also Morello, showed me a couple of things. But then everybody was talking about Freddie Gruber, and I was like, okay, who's this guy? And then I approached Freddie, and he was like, he ignored me. And then I asked Wackel, hey man, can you kind of pry open a little space for me? He's like, yeah, Jojo is cool, okay. So I went to Drummers Collective, where he kind of had, because he was living in LA, so he came over frequently to New York, and then he had a bunch of drummers, so we had that first lesson, and it was just like, stone the shit. After that lesson, he said, hey man, are you hungry? I want to go and get something to eat. I'll treat you. So on the way to I was like, okay, I was kind of pissed off in a way, but it was like, okay, let's do it. I want to go to hit some clubs and listen to some music afterwards. And so he took me to this Italian restaurant in the West Village. And at some point I was like, man, you know what? Nah, this lesson was bullshit. We got to do it again, I paid him $100 for it, like he didn't return the money, but he treated me for like a really nice dinner in this place. So we started to talk, and and it was kind of like he was testing me in a way, it was kind of like, are you one of these like stupid rock guys that wants to get faster hands, And then he started to understand, okay, I knew his music, because my dad is his generation. We talk about Ray Brown, we talk about Oscar Peterson, we talk about the Basie Band, and although I'm not exposed as a jazz musician, this is basically my heritage. And I played with Monty Alexander when I was 18. I got to play with Dizzy Gillespie and Nina Simone, so I could relate to his world. And then he kind of taught up. I went like, oh, okay. So we got past the testing. Then next time around, he got to New York. Okay, I went like, all right, Freddie, can we do this? He said, okay, come on. So I went to the same Drummers Collective. I went to the room. I said, man, I gotta do some phone calls. Just get ready. So I was sitting in that room for like 20 minutes, and like, okay, I'm just gonna start playing a little bit. So I just played there 20 minutes, half an hour, 32 minutes. Then Freddie comes in and I stop playing. Say, no, play. I'll play a little bit more. So my composure changed a little bit. I was like, okay, again, he's testing me for some reason. I don't know what this is,
Sure. And
then I stopped, and we had like maybe 15 minutes left or 20 minutes left, And I was like, okay, what are you here for? I wanted to ask him about technical stuff, hand stuff. And I had this intuition that if I was going to go out with this stuff, it was going to close out on me. I had just this idea, okay, like he didn't want to talk about technique. He wanted to talk about other shit. So I went like, okay, I have some technical questions, but I want to address, there was something else that I was concerned with. I was like, I'd like to get more low-end projection in my sound, because I felt my sound was medium rangy or trebly. And then he went kind of like, aha, okay, well, let's get to work. He said, your foot is not centered. And that was crazy because I had a lot of confidence in my foot technique, and people came to see me to take bass drum lessons. I already had my thing where I could play really fast, and your foot, you're not centered, you're not balanced. You're compensating too much for something that is not right. Well, like, okay, so he showed me this technique that he refers to as a constant release technique. So, when as soon as you play heel up, you're kind of like in the air, because your hi-hat foot is up and your bass drum foot is up, and then what are you gonna do? You kind of. So there's people who, you have to do yoga to develop core strength, and I was like, this is all bullshit. I don't want to hear any of this esoteric stuff. Like, okay, this is what you're gonna do. And he showed me this exercise that I explained this exercise on my bass drum video. So it's basically something that he took from ballet dancers, when they use the pole to kind of support them, and then they do like 1 foot up and all that stuff. So Freddie took a lot of influences from different things, and that was the real lesson. He said, okay, just do that. Then he said, okay, and then we had 5 minutes left. Say, I know you were going to ask me some hand stuff. Okay, what do you want to know? I say, well, I got this smaller thing and I got this. And say, okay, you have all the parts, but you don't know how to make them work together. So he showed me a transition thing from the left hand, how you change your grip as you go this way, and how to bring all the parts together. Just basically, I had all the parts, but they didn't work, they didn't integrate. So there was always a gap from me shifting gears, and there was a hole in there, and that caused a lot of insecurities and compensation again. Then I started to tense up, and that really helped me to let the stick do more work. Anyway, we did that, and that was cool. And with the hands, immediately I took a big step. I was like, oh, I understand. That was missing. And he also gave me some other ways to look at it. Basically, I always remember, I said, look, most people look at the problem from one perspective. Like if you look at a square, Then a square is all you have. But if you shift perspective, the square turns into a cube. It becomes three-dimensional. So this might be technique, but the same thing, you can look from this side, it's sound. Here it's feeling. Here it's time. And that was extremely helpful. And in a way, Freddie gave me the blueprint of the structuring that I could use for my first video, which was, it's not a course on hand technique, that Secret Weapons for the Modern Drummer, but it was basically a philosophical pamphlet on the physicality of drumming. And Freddie gave me not his method, but his blueprint of thinking that I could use. He's a real philosopher. He's a deep guy. But, he was not a sweetheart like, Chapin or Morello that was just like giving you stuff. He was kind of like, okay, is he worth it? So the takeaway about Freddie Gruber, as I experienced him, Freddie Gruber didn't give you solutions. He gave you riddles. If you could solve the riddle, you were worthy to carry that knowledge. If not, he would lure you into a zone where you could get totally lost. And this was going to happen with my bass drum technique, because I started to do that. And after a couple of weeks, I couldn't play anymore. I completely lost because I couldn't play the old way and I couldn't play the new way. I called him up and said, Freddie, man, my bass drum was, and because I played into the bass drum, I had to learn how to play out of the bass drum. And that was really, really hard. If like all your life you play into the bass drum, and then to learn how to do this. And I said, man, it just doesn't work. And I say, I'm not your nanny. Just keep doing what I told you. Don't bother me with this crap, okay. And you know what? It took a while, but he was right, because I had to go so deep into the rabbit hole until I understood what he was trying to tell me. So he gave me a surface, and through the surface, I had to work myself to the content. Now there's not a lot of teachers that know how to do that. It's a hard way. It's almost like you have to take a lesson on how to take a lesson with Freddie Gruber. And what was interesting then, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, I meet him again and I wave him. It was a drum festival somewhere, and Freddie was there, and I say, hey, Freddie. And I showed him the bass drum thing. And he just went like,
yeah,
you got it. So great teacher, but there's a complicated person. Freddie would just tell me stories about, him and Jack Kerouac, getting high in a bathtub, after hanging out with Charlie Parker. It's like, okay, he was a jazz guy, he was a real jazz. He lived it, with warts and all, some crazy stuff, he's not like the health conscious person. He was old school. It was really, really old school, but it's a part of it. It's a part of it, and you can't take this out. It's like he actually said, and he was not down with like a lot of the modern stuff, but he was hanging out with Zawinul, who's also old school. It's like, yeah, everybody wants to play like Jaco Pastorius, but nobody wants to live like him. I'm not an advocate of like a self-destructive lifestyle by any means, but you have to look at all the parts, to understand how something comes together. I don't believe in genius. I believe in circumstances, in one thing leading to another. Of course, all these people were extremely talented, but they all cook with water at the end of the day,
I'm curious too if he didn't actually have a phone call, and that 32 minutes of your lesson was him standing outside the door, just listening to you play.
I bet he was auditioning me.
Yeah,
he was listening and say, okay, am I going to show this guy anything, or is he going to waste my time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so we do have some questions before we get into your 5 choices. So we had Fernando Javier Cuadro. He asked, after all these years, how do you maintain consistent growth? And I want to add on to that, like, what do you quantify as growth?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't consider me growing consistently. I think growth happens not like this, but growth happens like this. You reach a plateau and then you elevate to another plateau. I think the crucial elements is, number one, the most important thing is maintain a sense of curiosity. You have to leave what you know. You have to step into the unknown over and over again. Once you become familiar, once you feel comfortable, you have to step into the unknown. That's uncomfortable, scary, because you don't know, is this going to be any good? Is anyone going to dig that? But all my heroes, the really great guys, they all did that. They were capable of doing that. That kind of separates the boys from the men. Are you able to re-innovate yourself by saying, okay, I did this. This is legitimate. Let's try find some new doors. Let's do something else. I think this is the most important thing, So the curiosity, find new things, discover things, a sense of courage to be able to sustain a uncomfortable feeling or a feeling of being lost, even temporarily, like become aware of your confirmation bias, say, okay, I'm pulled into this direction, but it's not important if I'm right or wrong. It's important to learn something that I don't know yet. I think this philosophically has been the most important thing, and so technically speaking, for me, it has always been learning new things, exposing myself to different things, learning not just to work music platforms, learning how to operate Final Cut Pro, learning how to do Photoshop, learning how to design something, learn how to edit videos, because my influences have always been not just music, but, art and film and, fine arts, I'm equally inspired by the protocol that someone like Stanley Kubrick had behind his work as Miles Davis, so to say, or Square Pusher, or that was helping me to see, okay, how do you get from A to B, and wanted to go from A to B. I think this is the most important thing, crossover to other platforms, and have a broad set of interests that can come back into what you do. Recently, I discovered a video of Arthur Rubinstein addressing the subject of practice, and you go like, well, I don't understand, that people hold it in high esteem if someone practices for 10 hours a day. So how can you express anything from your life experience if all you know is practicing? I can definitely hear if someone did his homework and practicing, but I'm not interested in that. I want to hear what this guy experienced in his life. I want this to come through the music. And I think this is very true as far as, understanding how we work. We need to have growth in our personal life that we can pour into the music, politically, emotionally, a sense of humor, whatever it is, our conflicts, they have to show in our music. This is what it's here for. It's a language that we can communicate something. There's so many techniques. I worked with Brian Eno recently, doing some experimental stuff, and which is based around AI, which is also something that I'm pursuing right now. Is just starting to learn how to make music with artificial intelligence, and it was really interesting to see how he works. He proceeds really fast. Say, okay, how's this idea? Let's not waste any more time. 20 minutes and go to the next thing. Okay, this is good. I'm going to come back to that, but we're not going to continue working for a long. So he has he has a backlog of, I don't know, as long as a Torah, you know, I mean, I don't know, 10,000 ideas. And he would frequently revisit them, you know, and or have them on random play if he does something outside music. If he reads or works on an installation, he has his own stuff playing in the back, and they go like, "Oh, this sounds good. What was that? Oh, okay, I did this in August 2014. Let's come back to that." So he kind of has a protocol to trick his ego. And you know that is an incredible gift. You know, if you're exposed to such a point of view, you know, like the producer's job is to be able to zoom into the, you know, the zero crossing, and then zoom out into a different country and have all the different viewpoints. You know, like getting really close and really far away. Sometimes your state of mind that informs your decision might not be the right one at the time. So you have to stay away. I mean, something that's extremely helpful that I discovered a couple of years ago is I used to be extremely perfectionistic, you know, and evidently, of course, it opened some doors for me, but it was tapering with my artistic output too much, you know, and it's another big story that I met a guy that used to work for Disney, an animator. You know, he was drawing on a napkin a Donald Duck, and it looked like, you know, it was like magical. I mean, he took the thing back without, you know, lifting the Sharpie of the napkin. I say, wow, how do you learn how to draw this so perfectly? I say, well, first of all, as an animator, I was making cells by hand. I drew this figure hundred thousands of times, but I never intended to make it perfect. I always aimed at clarity. I wanted to make it clear. And that was a game changer, a paradigm shift. I was like, okay, I'm going to remove the notion of perfection from my artistic library. I'm going to put it away because perfection is deteriorating upon approach. The closer you get, the farther it moves away. And I'm going to replace it with clarity. My only concern is, am I getting from A to B? It doesn't have to be a calligraphical, astounding handwriting on the envelope to the addressee. It can be full of orthographical mistakes and hardly legible. If it arrives in the mailbox of the addressee, your job is done. And it saves you a lot of time, it saves you a lot of heartache, and it opens up your antenna to a broader range. And everything that I've been doing ever since then is like, yeah, it's not perfect, but it gets a point across. Let's move on. Once I started to try to play like a machine, the game was over, because you can't. I had to, I got so to the cue to really sound like a machine. Well, at some point I had to surrender, and that was in the time where I was struggling with the perfection issue. It's like, okay, I'm dealing with something that is perfect. And I realized a human is not able to play like a machine, but is not supposed to play like a machine. Mm-hmm. And as long as an artist, I can create the illusion like I'm playing with machine, I'm getting from A to B. And this is what art is. Art is an illusion.
Well, and that's the only way you actually could compete with a machine, is to bring in your superpower, which is the fact that you are a human. A machine can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I refer to as the distance between 0 and 1. Now on unpacking the new possibilities of AI, we're working with probability engines and stuff like that. Now I've really become aware, of the one thing that we can't surrender to machines in order to consume their magic. That is very important. There's something that the machine cannot do, that, the notion exists, but it's still science fiction. So we have to protect that. That's our most important asset as humans. If we surrender that to machines, we're done. Well, we don't even have to wait till machines start to write code. We're gonna be screwed in 2025. It's going to be,
Yeah.
if that narrative, takes a hold of us, it's over. And we have to protect that. We have to be aware and confident of what's unique about us.
And you reference your TED Talk. Everyone go check that out. How nervous were you before doing that? Because that's a big deal.
Yeah, I was pretty nervous because I had to do it almost at the spur of the moment. It was like this came to me, hey, can you do it in 2 weeks from now? I was like, what am I going to talk about? Like the second TED Talk about improvisation, I had a little bit more lead time. So you want to put so much information into it. You have to structure it. You have 18 minutes cutoff time, not 18 minutes and 3 seconds. It's like you have to respect the format and all that. But it was good. That was also talking about evolving. Doing that has really, I brought something back to the music. Oh, okay. It's actually cool to be forced to consolidate your point of view. So people outside of your discipline can benefit from it.
Absolutely. Well, for the sake of time, let's just move on to the next question. So Don Frankham, I know that Tony Williams was a big inspiration for Jojo as a player. And for myself, I found guys like him, meaning Jojo, and Dan Mayo to be really inspiring. But the tendency to sound too much like them and imitate very poorly, can stagnate personal voice and creativity. For instance, at one point, I had Jojo's signature snare, chopper, and ride. So how did Jojo go about forming his own sound and style? And this is good because I think when I gave you my the options for the 5 choices, this is kind of something you wanted to bring up anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up, I was 11, 12 when the fusion era was in full swing. Then you had Mahavishnu and the Headhunters and Weather Report, who, it's a really, really a big influence, like Weather Report. Still up to this day, I believe it's one of the greatest bands ever. Like you have the Beatles, you have the Count Basie Orchestra, Weather Report has to be in that catalog. But anyway, so it's all the fusion drummers, Billy Cobb, Lenny White, Alphonse Mouzon, Steve Gadd, of course, was everywhere. And Tony Williams, the early Lifetime stuff with Larry Young, I didn't understand it. It was too complex. Whether, like the Billy Cobb's records were kind of funky and easy to understand. And then one night, Tony Williams came to Switzerland, came to Zurich, and my dad was like, okay, I was like 16 maybe. I have a surprise for you. So we went to see Tony Williams, and he was basically, okay, yeah, cool. I was not like a big fan, but I respected it. And it was kind of like, oh man, this guy doesn't have a Chinese cymbal, only one bass drum. It was a little bit like that, And then Tony had this yellow drum kit, and then he came out and started play. And literally, it took about maybe 4 seconds, and my life had changed. And this has never happened before or after. It was just basically, I was sucked in to a vortex of truth, and everything else from before was just not important anymore. I was like, I don't know, he broke my heart. This guy broke my heart. I was maybe ready to have it broken, but I needed to see in front of it. I mean, I was sitting 3 meters in front of his bass drum. I was like, and I remember after the show, I watched his drum tech packing up the drums till the last vestige of yellow had disappeared inside the case, and he took it out. And I was knocked out for weeks. Then I went back, I listened to all these records, and they sounded completely different, and was like, okay. Now, I was 17 at the time, or 16, and Tony Williams was 17 when he played with Miles. So, there was some sort of like a ridiculous competition, but a competition like, now I had the chops, but I didn't have the concept, So I transcribed everything that I could get from Tony Williams, everything. Especially there was one record that was only released in Switzerland at that point because he had a falling out with the record company. I don't know what the story is. It was a very obscure record he did in a trio called with Patrick O'Hearn, the bass player that was with Zappa and Missing Persons, and Tom Grant. I have a recording of that gig. I will put it up at some point. I had this on cassette. I just digitized it.
Oh, wow.
It's absolutely stellar. So I talked to Tony. My dad went back, and do the jazz talk, and it was like, this is my son. He plays drums too. It was like, what should I practice? And he was like, well, practice what you can't do. That was the amount of clarity and awareness he had, to simplify things. But anyway, I went on to be the Tony Williams clone up to the point where I realized I had to stop that. This went on for a couple of years, and it was beneficial for my vocabulary and everything. But I think the guy that kind of slapped me out of the two guys that slapped me out of the Tony Williams trance was seeing Vinny Colaiuta and Omar Hakim. Where we're like, okay, there's something else going on, that is also cool. Of course, there was Stuart Copeland, of course, there were Pete Erskine and people that were very important for me, or Jack DeJohn and Elvin, but Tony took up so much space that at some point, I was like, okay, now I understand how Tony, once I understood how Tony thinks, what brought him to play like this, I was ready to move on. I repeated that process one more time for hysterically and neurotically trying to copy something. That's when I started to play like machines, when I started to play Aimer breaks and stuff like that, but once I went out of this thing, that gave me, okay, I understand better how those things work. I don't need that guidance. I can enjoy it, but now it's my time to pay it forward with my way of looking at the same thing in a way.
Do you still have the band on Tony, or will you sometimes put on Tony and be like, all right, I want to play along to him?
I stopped listening to Tony Williams. I was like, I had Tony Williams, no access. I had to not listen to Tony Williams for, probably 10 years. Of course, when he played a gig, I went to see him play. I took any opportunity, but I didn't go into this like, I want to know how it's done. I knew I was gonna be devoured and consumed. It's just like a drug. Actually, funny enough, I read an interview of Tony very early, like the early 70s, where he was talking about his heroes, Max and Philly Joe and Art Blakey, and that he went through a very similar process. It's like, once I knew how those guys were doing the things, I didn't have to listen to those guys anymore. And I think this is a good guidance. Once you understand, how something is generated, appreciate it, honor it, but there's no reason to become this.
Well, and once you have been obsessed with someone for 3 years, which is a long time, even if you never listen to them again, their instincts that you've gotten from them are going to be in your playing regardless, whether you don't want them to be there or not. So just embrace that and then digest other things.
I think this is the biggest gift I got from Tony. And hence, it's the biggest gift I got from Art Blakey, and I got from Philly Joe, and I got from Max Roach, who he channeled. Now, to a newer generation, I can channel this gift without having to imitate his vocabulary.
Well, that's why, I guess, to kind of bring it all together, why this format, why I appreciate it, and I hope that the audience appreciates it, because if someone's obsessed with Jojo, like Dane was saying, I think the best way to not sound exactly like you is to listen to you and figure out what you listen to, so you can then channel it through that funnel and then make it your own. So let's just go. You did talk about the Amen break. So when we go into your top 5, I sent you a few prompts, and one of them was a specific groove that completely changed the way you think about drums. And so you did loosely talk about moving to New York, kind of wanting to be a jazz guy, and then you got introduced to the Amen break, and that just changed everything. Which, of course, if people don't know, it's from the song Amen Brother by the Winstons, Gregory Coleman. It's like a 4-bar phrase that people have looped, and that's drum and bass. That's how the origins of it. But yeah, what was it that turned you on about that specifically?
Well, in the first couple of years where I went to New York, I got disenchanted by the jazz scene because I romanticized it. From a European standpoint of view, I was like, okay, this is freedom, this is going to go on forever, like as we had jazz in the 30s, and then in the 40s with swing, and then in the 50s bebop, and in the 60s cool jazz, and then free jazz and fusion, and every 10 years you had this massive revolution. I expected this to go on and on and on, and there was still some stuff I was exposed to, but it was more kind of like a fusion crossovers thing because although I played a lot of straight ahead in my life, I wasn't really interested in like entering that. But I got disenchanted with the jazz scene because I just realized that jazz to me was always a radical progressiveness, and jazz had become conservative music, where my heroes were rebels, they were progressive people. People who play jazz today are conservative people, and also conservative people listen to jazz. This doesn't diminish my love to jazz. I love this. It's the most powerful art form that America has generated, for sure. But anyway, so I went into other stuff. I started working with John Zorn, was also jazz, but kind of more the free stuff and downtown. And then I ended up with the Black Rock Coalition because I liked that stuff at that time. Was all like Fishbone and Living Color, the Bad Brains, all these bands. I was kind of into that, so I started to hang out with this community. And they tolerated me because I was just this crazy guy from Switzerland, and who knew their music. I knew the Isley Brothers. I knew the Brothers Johnson. I knew all the stuff, So, and then I got together with a bunch of people with like Dave Fuginski, Michel Ndegeocello, like the neo soul thing. So that was the thing where I was working, and up to the point, where I started to get a name of myself in New York as like with the Screaming Head of Swords. So hey, this is this cool band with this cool drummer, and so I started to get a reputation from playing gigs in pizzerias and $20 gigs, and started to get exposure. And then we had this major deal with the Screaming Headless Torsos, but it was time for me to move on after about 2 years for a number of reasons. That is an entire podcast. And
Sure.
And then I kind of fell into some sort of like a vacuum because I didn't know what to do next, And now what is interesting, I was roommates with Dave Fuginski, the guitar player with the Torsos at the time. And there was one drummer called Mark Gilmore, not Marcus Gilmore, Mark Gilmore with a Q. He is the brother of David Gilmour, not David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, but the guitar player who worked with Steve Coleman and Five Elements, kind of like, and he gave a cassette of some very early aim and break jungle stuff from London, because he was going back and forth, and he had this a project called Tender Matrix, as I can recall. And I listened to that, I was like, okay, I don't know what this is. This is kind of cool, but I couldn't really relate to it, because it was just this abstract. So this kind of reminds me of a Tony Williams Lifetime. All these like syncopated, because the old school stuff was a lot of fun when it was not commercial. It's like boom, 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 it was this crazy collage of stuff. And I was like, this is kind of cool, but I didn't have a community to relate to. So this music was just there, and And with the Screaming Headless Tortoises, we started to incorporate some house beats and some hip hop beats. And at that point, I was already really into playing the funky drummer, replicated down to the T, the sound and anything, and really getting close. And there was a catalog of about 15 of those, Dutch boot, boot, shaka or all these iconic breaks, So I already learned how to replicate that and to transcribe things carefully, which is something that I learned from transcribing my Billy Cobham and Tony Williams and Lenny White and Harvey Mason and all those guys. So I was already knew how to do that. And I did the same thing with like machines. Now, at that point in Europe, I started to get acquainted because this is European culture. This didn't generate from America. This is something that came from the Jamaican neighborhoods in London. And then I found myself in maybe 1995 stepping into a drum and bass night. I think it might have been LTJ Bookham. I don't know. I wish. I couldn't find out. And for the first time, I saw 800 people dancing with those beats that I was just, and we're like, okay, I cannot afford to ignore this. Oh my God, and that became obsessed. I went back and I started to practice those beats, along those beats, and I started to use my different tunings and using different snare drums and put the toms away. And at that point, I was still using a lot of electronic drums. There was like, okay, the cool idea was to do this on an acoustic kit, So I started to talk to my friends about, I want to make a band like this, because at that point the first big electronica act started to become huge, like the Chemical Brothers, Prodigy. Whether in America drum and bass was still coastal, LA, New York, and a couple of places, so nobody knew what I was talking about. Like a few people was like, I want to do some drum and bass stuff. So like the people that we usually hang out with was like, what, just the drummer and the bass player? No, this is a style that comes from London.
Yeah.
So what happened was, like, there was a friend of mine who was a promoter in a small club in New York in the East Village called the Izzy Bar. It's maybe an 80 capacity place. And I played there frequently as a sideman with different, bands and hip hop, singer-songwriter, jazz. And he called me up one night and said, hey, I have a band canceled out on me on like Wednesday. Do you want to leap in with your band? I said, well, I don't have a band. Well, but he was telling me about this drum and bass thing that you have. And we're like, well, yeah, there's something that I'd like to do, but I don't have it together. I say, well, why don't you just put something together? It was like, yeah, no. I was still in the perfectionist shoes. So I hung up the phone. I went to bed. I couldn't get to sleep. This thing, but when I went back up, I called him up. 3 o'clock in the morning. So, okay, you know what? I'm going to put something together. So this was like, I had like 4 days. I had no idea what it was. I knew my beats. I had the beats, but I need someone to do it with, So I called a bunch of friends that I knew had a Jamie Saft, keyboard player, Patrice Blanchard, he played with Mary J. Blige, or Angelique Kiddo. I put together a jam session. I called up all my friends. Hey, come down. I'm going to do something. I had no idea. Oh, and I had a DJ from the DJ community that does drum and bass in New York that was very small in like 1997 or something like that. Anyway, there was maybe 40 people, most of them my friends. There was a bunch of guys that like the promoter brought down and a bunch of guys, DJ friends. And the DJ guys, they completely lost it. It was like, what is this? Like, where's the DAT machine? This is not coming from the drums, right? No. Where's the sampler? No. This is real time. And we sounded awful. We didn't sound good. It was like, it was a jam session, a very, very stoner thing. But the promoter said, do you want to do it next week? I kind of like that. You can have Wednesday. I did it next Wednesday. We did it again. It was a little bit better. Then we did it Wednesday again. So, okay, let's make it a regular thing. So I had a regular gig, but it was more kind of like a party. So we kept doing that. then people came down, say, hey, we heard about this. I'm really, then like Tim LaFay came down, said, man, I had no idea. And I knew Tim. It's like, I knew you doing the drum and bass thing. I'm really into it. So Patrice had to leave on tour, and then Tim came, and then Nerve was born. Like the first expression of this group. And a couple of months later, there was 200 people downstairs and 200 people standing up online. Playboy magazine showing up, New York Times showing up, to do interviews. Like, oh, what is going on here, And it gave me the confidence to now I created something, Now I came to New York and I created something. It doesn't exist in London because they were still trying to play this music live, and it's happening here. And it became bigger and bigger and bigger, and did this for a couple of years. And it was the party called Prohibited Beats. And we played once a week with no rehearsals. We always had guests, MCs coming in, a rotating roster of the best drum and bass DJs on the coast, but then also guests from London, and that was basically gave me the launch pad for who people recognize me for today, and it took many years. So like the drummer community didn't wake up to it up until maybe 2005, when I played with the second incarnation of Nerve at the Modern Drummer Festival, so they have seen that for the first time with the song Job On. So that was almost 10 years in between when I first started it and when the drummer world became aware of what I was doing.
I'm sure a lot of the independence from your jazz background, I mean, you were basically, it was perfect for you to transition.
Well, there was this club of people, like Mark Juliana, he came and hang out at my party. There was a new set of kids which now took this idea and made it their own, which is great. I mean, I have to mention one guy that started at the same time as I was doing it in New York and Boston. That is DeAnthony Parks. And I think, DeAnthony, I love that guy. He's so, fearless and ahead of time and so radical, and that he took the same idea and created something completely different than I did, in a way, like talking from the alphabet, I have the highest respect for DeAnthony, and sometimes I have to say, wow, I wish I came up with that.
Yeah,
he's great, and it reincarnates with JD Beck, with
oh my gosh, yes, I'm glad you brought him up. Yeah,
it's beautiful to see, that it continues,
Well, you are such a good co-host because you've been basically answering all my prompts just stealthily. You make this easy for me, so thank you.
Well, there was one thing. You sent me a question of someone that asked how we can get inspired from the kid.
Yes.
Right. I think one of the best things that you can do is elimination, restriction, because there's a notion that we have to make acquisitions to inspire us, but sometimes it's the opposite. When I started to learn about the machine beats, I put everything away, and for a month I was playing with a hi-hat, a snare drum, and kick. No toms, no cymbals. And after 3 days, I got really bored. It was like, okay, now I played anything. Then I entered the zone where I started to become creative, because the best way to spark creativity is forcing yourself to become resourceful. Problem solving, creativity, problem solving inspires and incites creativity. If you have everything on display all the time, you're not going to go there. But if you force yourself, and then after a couple of weeks, not only I developed completely new vocabulary that nobody else was doing, but it came from within. It became authentic. It was like, this is what I did. It's tough. It's really, really tough. And sometimes it's like, okay, let's leave the drums away for a week, and then again, I feel like playing drums. Okay, we pick up where we stopped, snare, kick, hat. And you should try that, if you need inspiration from like the kit, put everything away, and gradually say, okay, now I really feel I need a floor tom. Now I really feel I need a ride cymbal, and then, or only if you play jazz, snare, hat, and your ride cymbal. Put the kick away for a couple of weeks,
Well, I do want to make sure that I give Will Brooks Drums is the guy who asked that question. I said I'd give shout outs to everyone who asked the question. So I'm happy you caught that because I didn't know if that was going to be a question that was a little too vague to answer, but you obviously answered it beautifully. And I will say that in your first instructional DVD, some of my favorite parts of that DVD are when you're in the subway. That could be giving you sources of inspiration for years just off a two-piece kit.
To be fair, I have to give credit to my producer, Marco Tempest, who produced my video. Because, we had this video, it's all hands and pads and graphics. I said, hey, we need something to, like, relax the eye. And it was like, what are you going to do? Well, let's just take the drums and, like, just go on the street and play. It was his idea. It was not my idea.
Well, it captures New York so well because people are just walking by you. They're just like, oh, another dude doing his thing. It's so casual.
That's kind of the old New York, unfortunately. Like the New York is approaching Dubai. New York will be like Dubai in 10, 15 years from now. It's like, unfortunately, like I feel like New York has been cannibalized by its own mythology. It's not that place anymore. Still a lot of good stuff happening because 50 million people live there, but you can't just go to New York and you take a stab at it if you don't have rich parents. That's like, you can't do what I did anymore. So that will have its, you never know. So much things is coming upon us with social political changes and that New York, maybe, it's gonna go back to the dump it was that is cool to hang out with, and you meet interesting people that think differently,
In your knowledge, are there any scenes right now or cities that you think are still hanging on to that?
Honestly, where I am right now, and of course, I am talking from the point of view of a privileged person, that like right now, it doesn't matter where I live. I could live anywhere and do what I do, a lot of the things that I do. I believe the geographical aspect is 20th century point of view. In the 21st century, great stuff that I come across is from everywhere. I see some guy sends me an upload from some guy doing electronic music in the Ukraine, and I go like, damn, this is cool. Or some band from Ireland, or some guy in Dusseldorf that makes installations with music, or Lyon. It's that medium-sized places where you can still afford to live. I would say with the exception of London, maybe, that still has working class access to the scene. You might be living out 2 hours outside of the center, but I see more interesting things coming out of Bristol, for instance. All the electronic guys come from Bristol. Banksy's from Bristol. Ronnie Size is from Bristol. A lot of that stuff is from Bristol, all the electronic heavy stuff, and not from London so much. London is an industry focus. It's trying to perpetuate the old way of thinking. And I think the music industry, as we know it, has entered the long tail. The heydays is just, we were going to see NAMM show and all these things. That this stuff is going to disappear. I think sooner than later. It's not that I wish for it, but I think, okay, I see great stuff coming from everywhere right now, and the coolest stuff that I see coming out of America right now is coming out of Detroit, Nashville, Not so much New York. I mean, New York always has an output, but I really like what like Mono Neon does. He just does very different things. And Domi and JD, I don't know, they sit in a basement somewhere Midwest, cooking up stuff. They don't hang out in New York or like LA. So why should they? They don't have to do that anymore. So this is where I am right now, and things can change, but.
Was there a part of the reason why the Amen Break and that cassette tape excited you was because back then you knew that you were part of a small community that only knew about this? Like if you would have seen it on Instagram, and it had like 50,000 likes, would it have been like, but everyone else likes this? Was it kind of because you were the only one?
No.
Or felt like it in a way? No? Okay.
No, I was just like, I was completely. I fell in love with this music and the scene and the novelty of it and the underground aspect of it. I mean, it had a short shelf life. Drum and bass really quickly became commercialized, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
So I had to move on to other stuff. I mean, people still give me. People realized me for the first time when I do drum and bass stuff, but I quickly went, okay, I need to move on to other stuff. But still, electronic music has since then it's been an influence for me and the point of view how to make things. That I was just trying to find a way with Nerve. Up to this day, I mean, trying to create something else, something different. And that has always been my favorite tagline of Apple, think different. It's hard to tell, but I see stuff from other people doing. I discover it on Instagram, and it's like, okay, it's not so much what that guy or that girl does, but it's more like, wow, they have the courage to do that. It's like do something that doesn't fit into the protocol. No. You have an image. This is okay. One day they can do country and western. The next day they can do modular electronic. The next day they can do jazz or what I'm saying. Now it's cool to do that. It's not a record company saying, no, you are this guy and you are going to continue to be this guy. Those are the things that destroy people. Artistically and sometimes physically. That destroyed Elvis. He had to become someone that he was not. Elvis was rock and roll. That probably destroyed Michael Jackson. It might have destroyed Prince. It destroys people. It's really dangerous, really dangerous. So right now, anyone can do whatever he pleases to. Of course, on the negative, you're inside an ocean of millions of television stations that broadcast simultaneously. But there is a way. I still discover new stuff. It comes to me, and I go like, wow, cool, And I go, oh, you like this? Have you heard of that guy? Happens all the time.
Well, I guess this begs the question, when's the Jojo Mayer Country Western coming out?
Whenever I meet musicians that inspire me to do it, whenever I walk into a situation where like, hey, I mean, there's my girlfriend showed me some Swiss folklore music, and those guys are rocking. I don't associate with their scene, but the music, the integrity and the skill on what they do. I'd rather play with those guys than some whatever la 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 skilled jazz guys that really have nothing to say,
Sure.
I think this is the bottom line. You meet via a meta level. I just did a collaboration with symphony orchestra, with a composer who wrote a piece for me. That was a big challenge because contemporary classical music is really complicated music, and and
coming from you, that has to be really complicated.
Well, I know how to read music, but I can't sight read that stuff. This is like nested polyrhythms and metric modulation and one bar of 12/8 and one bar of 21/16, and it's really crazy stuff. I had to learn it by
Wow.
heart. Then acoustically, I can't play at the level that I usually play. I had to play 50% maximum of what I do. So my sound changed, and so I had to think more like a classical percussionist. But anyway. The meta level is what do we want to put forward, especially for the classical scene? For them, it's like, oh, okay, this is crazy. A drummer play that stuff. Okay, well, as Frank Zappa said, without deviation from the norm, you can't create anything new. So I was fortunate enough to have a conductor, an orchestra, a prestigious orchestra, one of the best in Europe, and the composer. They were like, okay, let's hold hands and step into the unknown and see what's happening. And anyone, the probability that it could be a disaster was there. But if I might quote Banksy, he said, without the possibility that it could be a disaster, it can never be art, real art.
Sure.
So again, it brings us to stepping into the unknown. If I have bluegrass and I go like, hey, we understand what you're doing here. Look, this is what we do. Maybe we can find a way to do something together. Man, I'll be up for it.
Well, I definitely want to hear that. I kind of said it in jest, but it's realistically, I would be the first one to listen to that. So
Hank Williams, that's some good stuff. I was always informed by black music, Ray Charles and everything, and very late, I was always, Nat King Cole for me was always the better singer than Frank Sinatra, but understanding what Frank brought to the table made me grow, so we're talking about in understanding Hank Williams, that's something, very soulful stuff, and that's it. That's what I'm interested in more than the surface or what it represents. It's like what's behind it? What made this come to be? Not who created it, but what created it. And then I think the things that are being created by the right values, curiosity, humor, courage, compassion, those things you will be able to listen to in 50 years from now or in 100 years from now, because it was created from the right values and not from, everybody likes this, let's also do this right now. I think this is our big opportunity. This is the opportunity of the new generation to go like, okay, we're doing what we'll like. Nobody tells us what to do. Because my generation, they dropped the ball. My generation dropped the ball. What a legacy they got from John Coltrane, Miles, the Beatles, James Brown, Hendrix. And what did they do? MTV? There's like, now we have to go back to the real stuff, And I think it's happening. I think the new generation, they're in better shape than the last couple of new generations. They're in better shape. And it gives me hope, when I see them doing it. I'm not a drummer. I'm a director. I do many things, like the new Renaissance man, like a guy like Louis Cole, who makes videos and plays drums and programs. And, this is the new way. This is what I was talking about before. It's like, do everything. Just the drums is one way to express something, and I can be an actor too, or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great place to stop. I have taken up a lot of your time. You've been so gracious. Do you have anything you want to hit people to real quick? Are there any new music that you've been a part of that you want to let people know?
Because of COVID, me living in Switzerland, and my guys in the band live in New York, our output has been, we had to kind of scavenge some stuff that we already did, but we're planning to do some more stuff like the latest record. Hold a second. This is the last record. It's called Music for Shark. it's a concept album. And this is probably my favorite Nerve record. I'm really proud of that because it's a.
That's such a cool cover.
This was made by an artist from Aleppo in Syria.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of deep. Yeah, you have all this bombed out stuff, and the diver is going up for air.
That's
I really
awesome.
like this record. This is a record. This was purely acoustic. We recorded this as you would record a jazz record, 1954, called After the Flare. So like after the solar flare, it takes out all the electricity. So we're probably going to do another one like this, an acoustic record, but we're also going to do another electronic record. Then I'm trying to bring as much stuff into people's, awareness. I did a collaboration with Jack Quartet, the string quartet from New York. You can watch that online. It's called Different Zones, Steve Reich type of thing. And then I don't have anything to show for the AI stuff that I do because I'm still working on it. This has been my thing during COVID, but this is going to come out eventually, and I think the symphonic piece is going to resurface on YouTube sooner or later, so you will be able to do that. And of course, if you're interested in those conversations with Nerve, we have our own Patreon channel where we have a live platform where we interact with our fans. They can come and check in and talk to us like once a month, but we also have unreleased material, B-sides, live recordings. So yeah, the Patreon thing of Nerve, that is still also running, so you can check that.
I'll drop that in the show notes so people can just go directly from wherever you're listening from. All right, Jojo, well, it's been an honor, man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope to talk to you soon, man, but have a good rest of the day.
Yeah.
And I'll see you later, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye, man.
Bye.
And that's the show. Be sure to subscribe, and if you're listening on a platform that allows for ratings or reviews, do that. It helps more people find the show, which means the show will get better and bigger, and hopefully I'll have a chance to sell out one day. But you'd be an OG listener that could brag to all your friends. Anyways, also, why don't you go ahead and check out bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the socials. Just search for @BigFatSnareDrum and you will find it. This show is edited in part using iZotope RX8 audio editor. It's amazing, so go check that out at iZotope.com. Bye.